reputation is everything, Cody. And for me, it was about building and sustaining a reputation that preceded conversation. So whether it was my athletes, whether it was even scouts, whether it was even other agents, whether it was, athletic directors, general managers, manufacturer reps, it was ensuring that I always started and finished relationships and deals, conversations, tough ones, great ones, in a way that sustained a reputation that was anchored with respect, with honesty, with authenticity, with all those things. And over time, obviously that can serve you incredibly well. So, for me, it's recognizing that reputations will be built, whether you want them to or not. So be incredibly intentional about how you do it and know that it absolutely matters.
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners. Hey, today I am excited to welcome a world's top 50 keynote speaker, author, and host of the incredible Game Changers podcast. Molly Fletcher was hailed as the female Jerry Maguire by CNN based on her 2-decade-long career, where she negotiated over $500 million in athletic contracts for some icons that we would all know, like John Smoltz, Matt Kuchar, Aaron Andrews, Tom Izzo, and Doc Rivers. Molly's also going to be one of our keynote speakers at our World Series of Success this January, and I'm excited to have her with us today. Molly, welcome to the Business of Advice podcast.
Honored to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
So, Molly, as a starting point, tell us about your road to becoming a top sports agent and getting to work with some of the biggest names in athletics.
Sure. So I was a student athlete at Michigan State. I played tennis, and so I always had a real interest in sports and the sports business in general. So I moved down to Atlanta from Michigan. I grew up in East Lansing, went 2 miles away to college, right? Such a rebel. And when I got down to Atlanta, I got an opportunity with a small agency where we had a few NBA coaches and a baseball player. And after the Olympics ended, where I had been Lenny Wilkins' driver through the Olympics as a young, kid right out of college, I said to our leader, I said, gosh, how are we going to grow? And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, how are we going to get more clients? And he said, well, we've gotten them through referrals and it's worked great. And I said, well, gosh, what if we got more aggressive and went and recruited athletes, coaches? And so fortunately, he blessed that. And I was pretty quickly down at Georgia Tech, leaning on the fence with scouts with chewing tobacco in their mouth and bubble gum and going after guys coming out of college, top round guys. And then, I got to a place where I had a critical mass of guys, Cody, and I needed help. And so I actually hired a guy that I had represented who had not made it to the big leagues, had been released, real smart guy, brought him on to help me scale baseball and then continued to step into golf and college coaches. And our coaches got fired and we grew a baseball broadcaster division from there because their wives would call and say, get this guy a job. He's driving everybody in the house crazy. So it evolved pretty organically, Cody, from there. And after about 18 years, had about 300 athletes, coaches, and broadcasters, and a team of agents, of course, that help support and serve our guys and gals.
Well, what I love about your story, and our good friend Rory Vaden introduced us, is it mirrors so much of what our advisors do. Often they start out as the solo advisor, as they figure out how to grow their client base. Then it's like, okay, how do we bring in other talented people to continue to help us grow and scale, which is exactly what you did, right? It's you reach this capacity or bottleneck as the sole advisor or sports agent. You have to bring a good team around you, and excited to talk about some of those things too. One of the things you talk a lot about is having a champion mindset. Obviously, the time you spent around so many legendary athletes, coaches that you've worked with, John Smoltz, obviously, who's one of the most competitive, players of all time. I know Tom Izzo's a client who's, just championship level coach. What's different about the way they approach their craft versus maybe some others that you've worked with? We won't call any names, but that maybe weren't as successful.
Yeah. So, obviously what was different was those two guys, for example, they didn't, get that head job for a year or 2 years. They've stayed there and they've won championships. Smoltz was in the big leagues for a long time. There's a lot of guys and gals that get up there for, as we say, a cup of coffee. The difference, in my opinion, is they weren't driven to achieve. They were driven to get better every day. which is a mindset shift. What got them up was the journey. I had, Cody, you referenced my podcast. I had Gino Ariamo on, who, of course, is won 11 national championships. He's been a 22 Final Fours, head women's basketball coach at UConn. And one of the things that drives guys like that, gals that have stayed and gotten to the next level and stayed there, is this desire and drive to get better. Because if we're driven to achieve, when we get there, when we win that championship, when we do those things and find ourselves at that pinnacle moment, now what? And so the drive to achieve is fleeting, but the drive to get better is unending. And Smoltz and Izzo are two guys that absolutely had that mindset.
Yeah, it's even to see, Izzo, all the success he's had and just keep, grinding away, getting better. And I didn't tell you this story before. Just an awesome story to his character. We had an advisor going through a little health situation who was a huge Michigan State fan, and through a connect, I know Dick Vitale real well, and so I sent something to Dick, and it was a cancer thing, which Dick's passionate about anyway, and he got Tom Izzo to call him, and Izzo called him one afternoon, talked to him for half an hour, sent him a bunch of follow-up, just great character guy too. So
100%.
To achieve at that level.
For sure. And Cody, the thing I would add to that is that it wasn't about them, right? Like you just illustrated. They wanted to use and continue to want to use their platform for good for others, which to me is obviously incredibly powerful, because to me, the drive that they have can be transferred. It's contagious.
Yep.
And that example of Tom doesn't surprise me at all. That's who he is.
That's a great lesson for any leader, right? Using that to benefit others is going to keep you there too.
100%.
One thing that I wanted to ask you, in your role, you were obviously dealing with top performers, but then at very different times in their career. So maybe, their first contract, and then they've had success, and they're trying to sign, that contract that's going to take care of them for their life, to maybe the last contract. How did your approach have to change in each of those different seasons or conversations, or what did you have to do differently in how you approach that relationship?
Yeah, it's such a great question, Cody. I mean, early in my career, I didn't have the reps. I didn't have the experience, right? I couldn't look at a draft guy and say, look, man, there's nothing you're going to go through that we haven't been through before with other guys. I couldn't look at a broadcaster and say, look, I've done a deal with every major network, right? I couldn't look at a college coach and say, I've done a ton of contracts for guys with ADs. And so what became particularly powerful is when you could say, look, man, there's nothing you're going to go through that I haven't been through before with another athlete. I mean, we've been beside them through injuries, through trades, through releases, through hirings and firings and all of those moments. So the reps over time was absolutely helpful. But the truth is, the needs of a PGA or LPGA player who's trying to get their card are very different from those of a person that has their card and has won tournaments or majors. The needs of a draft player who's navigating their way through the minor league system is very different than Smoltz's needs, for example, or a veteran guy's needs. And the irony of it is probably the more established an athlete or coach is, the less they needed us at some level, right? I mean, we were certainly trying to capitalize on that platform with endorsement deals and appearances and speaking engagements, navigating the next stage of their career. I mean, when Smoltz was, inside of his career, I said, John, early in his, well before he was going to retire, I said, John, what does it look like when you're done? Because none of these guys ever think it's going to end, Cody, right? Like even the brightest, most realistic, reasonable guys don't ever think it's going to end. And it's like, dude, it's going to end. It's going to end. Whether you choose for it to end or not, it's going to end. And so I always try to be real realistic with my guys and authentic with my athletes, because sadly, they're in a world where a lot of people don't tell them the truth. And they needed the truth, and that at some level with love and with kindness was my role. So when I started to see that was in the imminent future and in the near future, I'd say, John, like for example, John, what do you want to do when you're done? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that came up for him, but particularly was, gosh, I love love TV. I wouldn't mind calling games. So whenever he wasn't in an all-star game or whenever he wasn't deep in the postseason, we'd put him in a booth and get him some reps and get him some experience and start to build a film. And so their needs are distinctly different along the way, probably very similar to your advisors, right? The need of a young family with no kids is very different than a business owner with 5 kids that has just potentially sold a business or anticipated. So very different. And I think our role in that as their advisors is to navigate those moments for them, to anticipate those moments for them, and do it with authenticity and deep preparation.
There were a couple things you said in there I want to call out that I think are really important for, obviously any advisors, but I think any business owner. One of the things I don't think we put enough thought into is like how important the reps are. And I see this a lot with, we'll have advisors who have put in a lot of reps, right? They've met with a lot of people, helped a lot of people. Then when they hire new advisors in that are maybe younger in the industry, they get frustrated that they're not as good. And I always tell them, like, you've got to find ways to get them reps. Like, that may not even be like prospective clients. Have them meet with your existing clients and do reviews. Find ways to just get them reps, because so much of it is like you've got to go through it. But the second thing you said that I love that I don't know that advisors do well enough all the time is when you're meeting with let's say it's a prospective client, letting them know that there's not a situation you're going to go through, right? You're going to have a cancer diagnosis. You're going to lose a loved one. We're going to have a market. I mean, put it in relevant terms of right now, the markets are going to have a drop. Like, we've been through all that, and there's not a situation we've been through that we don't know how to handle. And I think that's just a great conversation point to have with them also. It's I was excited to have you. There's so many parallels between that.
Whenever I speak to advisors, I always talk about how, gosh, as an agent, I'm fee-based. I'm representing often really a whole family. Yep. It's sometimes a longer sales cycle than we want, right? I mean, there's a lot of similarities. And I guess what I found work, Cody, when I was an agent and I brought on young agents to help me scale the business, to help me pour into our clients and serve them. One of the things that I consistently tried to do is bring them into meetings, get them exposure into these meetings. And then often, depending on the client, I would spend a lot of time with that client bragging about this young agent, so that potentially that agent really wanted to call, potentially that athlete really wanted to call my young agent versus me, so that those guys could build a relationship with the agents that I had in the office. And so often it was bringing them, but it was pouring into them, but then it was lifting them up in front of the other clients, so that people almost thought, well, shoot, why do I want to call Molly? This guy sounds better.
Yeah, that's great advice. I hope everyone takes that and thinks of opportunities to constantly lift up your team, in front of them and bring them. One thing you said a few minutes ago, you were talking a little bit about, those setbacks that people go through. So injuries, slumps, maybe they bring someone in and take your job away from you. How, because our advisors, I would say, have to deal with that on a daily basis, right? The same thing. People have these life setbacks, we'll call them. What did you find helpful in helping your clients kind of work through those difficult situations and move on?
Absolutely. It makes me think, Cody, of a time one of my players, Jeff Francoeur, was traded from Atlanta, his hometown team, loved by, Atlanta, loved by Bobby Cox, the manager at the time. And at about 11 o'clock at night, my phone rang and it was Jeff, and he was a wreck. He was in tears. And he said, "Oh my gosh, Molly, I just got traded." And I knew he had been struggling significantly. And I thought, gosh, I know this is going to be a tough move for the Braves, but I think they might trade him because he's not producing. And he was a wreck. And I said, talk to me. And he said, man, Bobby pulled me in. I love you, man, but, you've been traded. And it was a moment when I said, you know what, Jeff, this is exactly what we need. A new clubhouse, a new uni, new spikes, new teammates, a new hitting coach, right? A new manager. This is what we need to shift. This is going to be a good thing. You're good. You belong here. You can do this. And, this is an opportunity for you to step into a new situation and find all the good in it and do what you know that you can do at the highest level. And so to me, it was a mindset shift that I needed to create for Jeff really quickly. And those moments happened a lot. I do think, though, and I believed that, Cody. I felt that in my heart of hearts, and Jeff is a guy that I love, that's what Jeff needed to shift. Yeah. But I think our role as advisors to our clients is to tell the truth. Tell it fast, tell it yourself, be authentic, do it with love and kindness, anticipate these moments deeply, and also recognize that don't avoid them, right? When I always say to folks, when you get up from a meeting or a call or the room and you walk out and you think, oh my God, sweet. They didn't ask. They didn't ask that question that everybody else generally asks. Or boy, they didn't seem frustrated that we're down 10%, 12%. They weren't frustrated that we didn't reallocate, right? They weren't frustrated that I mismanaged and we weren't in, CDs, bonds as much as I took. Address those issues because they know what's going on. And if you avoid them, I always say you want a problem to get really good, just drop it over here in a petri dish and it'll get awesome. Yep. Just leave it alone over there, right? Yep. So we gotta deal with those firsthand and quickly.
I love that, addressing them head on, saying, hey, this is why. Usually makes those problems a lot less. One other thing I want to ask you is, a lot of things I want to ask you, but one specific is, the other parallel I see between your industry and ours is sometimes there's a bad reputation to it, right? So you were hailed as the female Jerry Maguire by CNN, and when you think about that movie, Jerry Maguire kind of was born out of this epiphany of how slimy he felt the business was. Sometimes there is that the feeling about that, but I think also even in the financial services that it can be this, Sure. industry that's all about the money, which it's not. Like your profession, I think done well can be one of the most noble things that helps people in a massive way. But how did you go about gaining trust and connection in an industry that might not have been known as much for that?
Yeah, to me, it was a wonderful advantage that the industry, sadly, has that reputation or has people that aren't behaving with integrity. Reputation is everything, Cody. And for me, it was about building and sustaining a reputation that preceded conversation. So whether it was my athletes, whether it was even scouts, whether it was even other agents, whether it was, athletic directors, general managers, manufacturer reps, it was ensuring that I always started and finished relationships and deals, conversations, tough ones, great ones, in a way that sustained a reputation that was anchored with respect, with honesty, with authenticity, with all those things. And over time, obviously that can serve you incredibly well. So, for me, it's recognizing that reputations will be built, whether you want them to or not. So be incredibly intentional about how you do it. And know that it absolutely matters. And we live in a world where, people's testimonials, if you will, of us, our mutual friend, Rory Vaden and AJ Vaden, they talk about that, right? Testimonials, reputation are some of the things people lean into more than about anything else. So it's important that we're intentional about how we build it and that we do it in a way that's authentic to us.
You talked about relationships there. It would seem in your role you had to balance a lot of different relationships. So obviously you have the relationship and trust with your client, which would probably be the most important, but then relationship with the teams, the companies or sponsors that may be, coming to your clients. And all of those have very different goals or different motives or objectives. How did you balance the needs of each of those parties, or maybe said another way, how did you make sure that those relationships were always win-wins with all those different parties?
Absolutely, and I wouldn't say I batted 1,000, but I think sure. I think I batted a good 950 or something. But how I think it's consistency, it's honesty, it's being fair in your approach. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make in negotiation is not spending enough time in the head and the heart of the person that they're navigating these tough conversations with. So often we spend a lot of time thinking about what do we want? What matters most to us? But in my opinion, you need to spend more time getting inside of the world of the people that you want to negotiate with. And when you do that, you can meet them where you are, right? When I was negotiating a baseball player's contract, I wanted to understand where the team's payroll was, right? Who was in the minor league system? Who was on the free agent market? Who could they trade for if they so wanted to? So the more that I was in their head and heart, the more that I could approach the conversation with intelligence, but certainly with an understanding of the kinds of things they were waking up thinking about, worried about, anticipating. So those were incredibly important. I think, a lot of people try to play a lot of games inside of negotiation. And to me, it might work once, but I'm not sure it's going to work twice. And what always mattered was, look, I needed to make sure, if I was negotiating with the Yankees and maybe we couldn't come to terms, I wanted to always walk away the right way, because I knew very well that I was going to have another guy that got drafted by the Yankees at some point, and I needed that relationship, right? And the other thing, I think, particularly in college athletics with a college coach, the relationship between a college coach and their athletic director is tight. It's different than potentially other situations. And so, at the end of the day, that coach has to go and sit and ask for additional resources or whatever it might be. So that relationship needed to stay intact. I have found that the stronger the relationship, the better the deal, and the faster that you can potentially get it done over time. So it's about a mindset of being relational in our approach, not transactional, which can get easy to do in this world that we live in that's clipping. You're wanting to move the chains, right? We've got to be intentional about staying relational in our approach.
You said something in there I want to ask a follow-up question on, because our advisors, even the best of them, half of the prospective clients they sit in front of typically tell them no, right? Hey, the best convert 50%. Is there, and I'm sure you had that, where you were chasing a client or trying to work a deal and it didn't happen, and you talked about, leaving that in a way that relationship is maintained. Is there anything you did that you felt was a good way when the deal didn't go the way you wanted, or maybe you didn't get to the client? Were there any things you did to maintain that, or gracefully, walk away from those that maybe came back to benefit you, down the road, because maybe they went with another agent and then they're like, okay, messed up there, came back. Anything like that pops out to you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think in the moment, inside of those conversations, we got to ask so many questions, get in their world. And we know this in pitches and in conversations, but sadly, it doesn't always happen. And so for me, Cody, it was about getting inside of their world enough that I could leave with 2 to 3 things that I could do to demonstrate that I listened, demonstrate that I cared, add value in their life moving forward in some way, so that no matter what the outcome of that conversation was, I could drip on them over time. And maybe through that persistence, through that dripping, they might turn the corner. No to me is just feedback. I mean, it's no, but it's feedback. And a story that comes up, I had a golfer out of the University of Georgia that I recruited, unbelievable kid, kind of from the age of, 8 or 9, supposed to be out on tour making, and doing incredible things. And I recruited him for a couple years. I would go walk practice rounds and spend time with him, got to know his family, his brother, his mother, and his dad. And so when it was time for him to sign, when he was coming out of college, he went a different direction. And it was interesting. He went with an agent that basically said, look, we know you're going to make so much money out there that we're going to write you a check right now, because we know that it's going to take you a minute to make some money. So we're going to write you a check right now. But then when we go get a deal for you, we're going to offset what we wrote you a check against with that deal, with that inflow. So he took that because he thought it was interesting. He's an 22-year-old kid. Somebody's going to give him a couple $100,000. He's like, sweet, I can get my car. I can, buy a house. I mean, he thought, this is great. Well, guess what? Now the agent's primary goal was to get a deal. he wasn't really worried about what that deal might be. In other words, despite the fact that this athlete had always played the Titleist ball, when Nike came to the agency and gave him 3x what Titleist was going to give him to play the ball, guess what the agent did? They sold him
Nike
on shifted to the Nike ball. Well, sadly, this young man couldn't hit the Nike ball off the tee for whatever reason. I mean, it's a great golf ball, but he was hitting it sideways. I mean, he couldn't get it done. And he was struggling, and he, was under this multi-year agreement to play the ball that he really had never played in his whole life. And so inside of that window, when he said no, he goes this other direction, they pour money on him, he's hitting the ball sideways, his dad dies. And I was at the funeral, and I sent him a note, and his mom was an artist and drew wonderful Christian art. And so, for which I'm interested in. And so I went and to her because I really loved her. She was a wonderful woman. And so I bought some of her art, and I saw him there and his brother there. And I stayed connected to him. I watched him when he would play really well. For whatever reason, I'd send him a text. When he would struggle, I would wish him well at the next tournament. And sure enough, I'll never forget, I was getting out of an elevator in Puerto Rico. I completely remember the moment. And he called me about a year and a half later, and he said, Mal, I made a mistake. Would you consider representing me? And I love this guy. And I said, absolutely, man, I would be honored. And so we switched. And so I think that the reason I share that story is that as an agent, as an advisor, we get now, listen so much that you have nuggets that you can then deliver against in a way that is legal, obviously, authentic. And I know in the advisor world, there's a lot of things they can't do, but you can wish them a happy birthday. You can send them notes. They went to a certain college and their football team won. You can know that their family's going on spring break, send them an article. You can do all kinds of things to show them, man, this is what this relationship would look like.
Yep.
And when we do that and the advisor that they're with doesn't, that advisor gets exposed. And over time, I believe consistently, your odds are good that you could get the business.
That's great. So much wisdom in there for people to use. I think, too, one of the things is just, I've learned this over the years. I think showing up for people during the difficult times also is a huge part of it. So just being there. I heard I won't say who, I read this years and years ago, and it's always stuck with me. It was a leadership book, and he said, weddings are optional, funerals are mandatory. The point being, like, everyone's there during the good times. It's the tough times when people need you most. And so
absolutely,
it's a great one there. One question I want to ask you is about dealing with some of these elite athletes and just what drives them. So is it, in your experience, was it more the drive to succeed, or was it more the drive to fail, or maybe the fear of failure that drove them more? In anything that we could take away from that?
Yeah, I think the best ones, the good ones. I mean, as I said, I mean, they're driven to get better every day, and so they hate failure. I mean, they don't like it, and when it happens, they can't stop thinking about it. And I can guarantee you, like a guy might go out and throw, 8 innings, and but he allowed, 6 runs, and all he's doing going home that night, even if the team won, he's thinking about what happened, on those moments when guys got a hold of those pitches, right? I mean, and coaches might win games, but they go home at night and they think about all the things that didn't go right, all of the moments maybe that they made the wrong call, that they put the wrong guy in or the gal in, whatever it might be. So they are always trying to get better, which means they're consistently picking apart the things, the moments, the decisions, the calls, the pitches, the plays that didn't work. And they want to understand what those were so that the next time they don't do it again, right? I mean, I saw that over again. The best of the best, they're going to bogey golf holes, right? They're going to fail. They're going to miss. They're going to make a bad call. They're going to lose a game, whatever. But the best recover really fast. They the best golfers in the world don't bogey 2, 3 golf holes in a row. They bogey one, and then they get back to even. They birdie the next one. They par the next one. They flip it quick. And I think we can all take a page from that book in our own lives, because, you know, your advisors, I mean, these guys, they're going to have tough days and tough calls and tough moments. But you got to shift the mindset fast and recover and go get that next piece of business.
Well, I think that and what you said is they also evaluate what they did wrong, you know, and make those adjustments quickly too. So that's a big part. One, you know, I see this with our advisors. A lot of them, they'll have a record year, then they'll do it again and again and again, and they just keep growing. But you'll see sometimes that'll have a great year, then the year will drop off. I'm sure you've seen that with some of the athletes that you represented, right? The ones like a John Smoltz who just consistently get better. Is there anything that you've seen that maybe is the difference between those two? Someone that just consistently gets better versus someone who, and maybe it is back to that achievement versus getting better every day, but just curious what makes people continue to be able to break records versus those that have a great year and then relax.
Yeah, I mean, Cody, I believe it is 100% this desire to get better, that what doesn't get them up in the morning is achievement. It's this, they absolutely want to hold trophies over their head. They want to reach those moments. Tom Brady wakes up to win another championship, but he also will wake up the day after and consider the things that he can do to get a little bit better. And so it's this mindset, it's this curiosity, it's resilience. I just launched a on-demand course called Up Your Game that has these 8 keys to unlock drive. And they're, you know, things like discipline, things like resilience, confidence, energy, right? Connection, curiosity, mindset. Absolutely. So to me, those are the kinds of things that are inserted into the heads and hearts of the people that keep going and that aren't satisfied with a big win. They want to get better.
Okay, I want to ask you one kind of final question, and then we'll jump into some lightning round questions if you're good with that. This one's kind of a unique question, I guess you would say, but it's another parallel that I see between your industry and financial services industry, and that's for the 20 years now I've been in this business, I've heard about we need more female advisors and more female representation. Obviously, you come from a highly male-dominated industry also. So I want to ask you 2 questions. Or were there things that people did to support you as you were entering the industry that was valuable? And then the second question would be, are there things that you think we can do as an industry to invite more women to the table, because they're such incredible advisors that we do need more of them in there. So kind of just throw those out to you.
Well, in regards to your first part of the question of what did people do to support me? I mean, I wouldn't be here without the support of some incredible men in the business, and particularly the man that I work for. I'll never forget, Cody. It was one day I was early, young in my career, and I went into a boardroom. He brought me to this meeting, which really I didn't have a role in, but he was just trying to get me some reps and some exposure, to our point earlier. And Isaiah Thomas walked in, one of our clients, and Isaiah started telling a story, and then he kind of looked at me and he kind of looked at my boss and he said, "She probably shouldn't hear this, you know, you probably should leave." And my boss looked at Isaiah right in the eyes and said, "She knows everything I know, man. She's not leaving." That was pretty cool, right? That's because cool. I gained a lot of respect from Isaiah in that moment, but I also believe, boy, this guy's he's gonna help me win. You know, whether even if it was my clients. I mean, there was a ton of times when, you know, I remember Brian McCann and a couple of my guys came over to talk to me during BP batting practice at a big league, you know, game, and the manager started yelling at him. One of the like the third base coach. He's like, "Dude, what are you guys doing over there hitting on that chick, man? Get over here. Let's go." And my guys were like, "Easy. She's my agent." And, you know, that there was no other women in the business when I started. So they had my back. And so for that, I am absolutely grateful. So I think it's about men and women in the business lifting up, supporting, having the backup, being there for, and being a resource for, and not just saying it, but doing it. I mean, I had a woman on my podcast, and she talks about the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, right? And I think men and women who are trying to bring in men and women, into the business, we can't just be their mentor, right? We got to sponsor them. We got to have their back when they're not in the room, right? We got to have their back in the moments that they need support and endorsements, if you will. And so when people do that and can do it consistently for women, I think we can unlock more women in the space. And, Cody, I speak to a lot of financial advisors, and, every single room, right? 85% of the room is dudes.
Yeah.
And 15% are women. And I think that, I know a lot of women in the business, and they're very successful. So, and no different for me as an agent. I do a lot of things to try to support other women getting in the business, because done right, they can be really successful and have a really big impact. So I appreciate that question, Cody. Thank you for doing that. And I'm excited to know that that's something that is important to you.
Well, and maybe one other question I'd ask, because you spoke a little bit to the men in the industry. We have three or four of our top 10 advisors are female advisors. Any advice that you have for them, maybe, is you had, that's one of the things I guess maybe is you had success. Are there opportunities that for those female advisors, things that they could be doing to support other women in the industry?
Absolutely. I think, bringing them in as part of your team, supporting them, taking time for them, telling them how you've done what you've done. And I'm sure these women at that level are doing all those things, candidly. Mm-hmm. I bet they are. Yep. But continuing to do those things, continuing to bring them in, put their arm around them, be real with them, be direct, support them, sponsor them. Coach them, be a resource for them. Those things are obviously incredibly important. And then, maybe there's opportunities to from time to time, if the business doesn't make sense for them because they're at a certain level in their career, can you open up some doors and hand them some business, some opportunities? I do that a lot with young women who want to speak. If it's a date or an event that doesn't make sense for me, I hand it to, if I can, and the client is interested, to another woman that I think could deliver a great message to. So that to me is a couple things, Cody, that I think people could do.
Nope, appreciate that. Okay, final lightning round question. So I ask everyone these at the end of the podcast. Just a couple things that when I would have asked you these in our January World Series event if you were there, probably backstage. So I'd just like to ask them on here. But they can be quick answers. It can be whatever comes to your mind. So first one is this. As we look back over the past couple of years now, since the start of COVID, is there a lesson that you learned that you think you're going to carry forward for the rest of your career or life?
Wow. Through COVID, I would say, we can do hard things. You can do hard things. I can do hard things. Cody, came back from spring break with my family in March of 2020. I do about 100 keynotes a year. I walked up to my little dry eraser board calendar and erased, $500,000, right? Yep. And it was like, whoa. And then it was a moment where my team and it was like, roll your sleeves up, man, find a way. And serve your clients, meet them where they are. And I, that was a moment when I, sent an email to a lot of the people that I work with a lot. And I said, how can I support you? It's not about the money, but gosh, I've got 6 weeks totally cleared at this point.
Got some free time.
Can I jump on a town hall? I'm happy to do it for free, whatever you want. So, recognize the power in relationships and being there for the people in your life that matter most during those tough moments.
Yeah, it's funny. We were on spring break too. I still vividly remember the head of our HR texting me. Yeah. He's like, "Are you seeing what's going on right now?" And I'm like, "I'm not." So I started looking. I'm like, "Okay, now I am."
Yeah,
so I remember that was the day they started canceling all the big tournaments and everything. So it's funny. Okay, second question: what is the one thing that you did that graduated you from good to great in your profession?
The one thing I would say would be, curiosity, discipline. I got to give you two there, but curiosity is huge. To me, particularly even for advisors, right? Getting curious about the way you can solve and serve the people that you work with and that you want to work with. Curiosity, huge. Discipline is massive. I mean, I think, the truth is when people say, oh, Molly, that's cool, man. You're like a motivational speaker. And it always makes me kind of, because to me, motivation is fleeting. And so I certainly obviously deliver messages that are motivating, but what's more important to me is that there's tools and tactics that they can absolutely lift up and apply immediately, consistently. Discipline is an absolute secret weapon. And when I think about the guys and gals that I worked with that didn't get to the show, if you will, for a cup of coffee, but stayed there, it's because they had consistent discipline.
That's good. Third question. Is there something you're doing this year to drive your own personal growth that you're excited about?
I'm really digging into and studying deeply drive. And to me, the opposite of drive is complacency. And so why do people stay stuck? How do they get there? Why do they stay there? And then what are the ways in which I can ensure that we give them the tools and the formula to unlock their drive for next level success is something I'm particularly sort of obsessed about right now, and researching, getting my head inside of consistently, and the result of that will be a couple different things, but one of which will be a book on that in early 2024.
Well, that's a great transition to the fourth question. It can't be your own. What is the book that you've recommended most to other leaders?
I would say The Alchemist is a book that I read a long time ago. And I just, to me, when we anchor our work in purpose, which that book is, about, it's a powerful thing. Because when we know why we do what we do, it really changes our approach. It changes how we do it, why we do it, obviously. And it can help suffocate challenges, fears, helps us be brave in tough moments. So The Alchemist, I think, would be one. But I mean, Cody, like you, behind you, you have a stack of books.
Yeah.
I have thousands, and am blessed to interview some incredible people on my podcast. The other one I love is, James Clear, Atomic Habits, great book. I could go on and on and on, but there's a couple for you.
That's where you go look. Okay, what are all the books that What's interesting? The Alchemist has been recommended a couple times on this podcast by people.
That's cool.
So good recommendation. Cool. And James, his is we actually had him come in and speak to our team. It was right before his book was launching, like the next month. So nobody really knew who he was all that much. I'd followed his kind of newsletter and blog forever.
Sure.
He was great. And then to see what that book has done, Atomic Habits, if people haven't read that, I mean, it's one of those books that is going to go down, as like an all-time classic. The way that it is sold so much for so long is pretty fascinating. So, and not with a lot of hype like so many book launches have these days, right? Just this organic growth that is phenomenal, which is probably how the classics work, I guess. So
absolutely.
Okay, final question. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Probably from again, Cody, I'm not very good at giving you one. My mom said, you can have it all, you just can't have it all at once. And that was, pretty good advice, right? In other words, we have to be pretty intentional about our time and our energy, and be really focused on that thing, that one North Star that we're really going after, and stay focused on that. I had Rashma Shajami on my podcast, and, she says, which I think is really cool, particularly for the, is be brave, not perfect. And, that one was good. Dabo Sweeney told me, I loved this one. Dabo said, bloom where you're planted, right? I mean, you may have all these aspirations, and we all do, right, of where we want to go. But like Dabo said, look, man, you got to just, wherever you are right now, crush it. And that was his mindset when he was an assistant.
Yeah.
And so when the nod and the tap came to be a head coach, he had done all the things in that moment to position himself incredibly well for that next thing. But it was because when he was in that role, he wasn't trying to be somebody else. He was trying to be the best in that role.
That's good. Molly, it has been a pleasure to have you on the show today. Can't wait to have you on stage in January at our event. Obviously, you have a podcast. We've referenced it a few times called Game Changers that you have to go check out, especially if you like sports. You've had so many incredible guests on there in the sports world, but a lot outside of that. But how else can people connect with you after they hear this?
Sure. MollyFletcher.com is a great place to start. And so I'd encourage people to check that out and go there if they're interested.
All right. Appreciate your time. For everyone who listened, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow us on social media, and more importantly, make sure you share it with someone that you know would benefit from hearing this, because there's a lot of people counting on us to be great. So go be great. Molly, again, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Cody. It was fun.